The M1 MacBook Pro is a good laptop, but I just can't recommend it anymore. And that probably doesn't make sense without more of an explanation, but I can only think of two reasons why someone might still want to buy it. I want to start out by talking about the display because that's a big deciding factor, but first, a very quick word to those of you who already own a 13-inch MacBook Pro. Again, it's a good laptop, and if it does everything that you need, keep using it. I have one, and we use it every day, but if the differences that I'm going to talk about in this video matter to you, then you may want to upgrade. And if you don't have one, Apple recently released a 14-inch MacBook Pro, and we also have the M1 MacBook Air, so this video will help you decide. When we look at the display on the 13-inch MacBook Pro, we're getting a 13.3-inch Retina display with a resolution of 2560 by 1600. That's the exact same display that we're getting on the MacBook Air, and the only difference is that the 13-inch MacBook Pro has a maximum brightness of 500 nits versus 400 nits on the MacBook Air. That's it. It's not a better display, it's not sharper, it doesn't have a higher resolution, and it doesn't have a higher refresh rate. And by the way, a 25% increase in nits does not translate into a display that's 25% brighter. So is it brighter? Yes, but is it so much brighter that it feels like a night and day difference? No. Now, when we look at the display on the 14-inch MacBook Pro, we're getting a substantial upgrade. So first of all, it's a larger 14.2-inch display. It also has a high resolution of 3024 by 1964, and it's a liquid Retina XDR display, which is backlit by mini LEDs. I've used both of the 13-inch MacBooks since they were released, and I now have the 14 and the 16-inch MacBooks, and I can tell you that the difference is immediately noticeable. If I put these side by side for you in real life without YouTube compression, the 14-inch MacBook Pro display is gonna look better every time. As far as brightness, it also has a higher sustained brightness at 1000 nits and a peak brightness of 1600 nits for HDR content. It's also a ProMotion display, which is Apple's adaptive refresh rate, meaning that the laptop is able to conserve battery life by reducing the refresh rate down to 24 Hz when you're looking at static content. So for example, if you're just sitting there reading a web page, it can go ahead and lower that refresh rate. Then if you start scrolling or navigating around the operating system or watching content or playing games, it will bump the refresh rate all the way up to 120 Hz to give you a smoother and more fluid user experience. So if you're not getting the MacBook Air because you want a better display, the move to the 13-inch MacBook Pro only offers a very slight improvement, whereas the move to the 14-inch MacBook Pro is a major step up. Now, the same is true for the 16-inch MacBook Pro, but I'm trying to keep this video to the models that have this approximate form factor, and I already have several videos about the 16-inch M1 Pro MacBook, which I'll link to at the end of this video. Now, speaking of form factor, there are some differences, but they aren't major, at least as far as portability. The M1 MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air have the same footprint, and the 14-inch MacBook Pro is slightly thicker and larger, but not really to the point where I feel like it becomes a determining factor. Unless you have a bag that's specifically designed to fit one of these 13-inch laptops, you should be able to fit the 14-inch one. So if you're looking for the lightest laptop, that's going to be the MacBook Air. Otherwise, there isn't a significant enough difference between the 13-inch MacBook Pro and the 14-inch MacBook Pro to make me choose one over the other. Now, another area that I want you to consider is the ports. So with the 13-inch MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro, you're getting two Thunderbolt 3 ports, both of which are on the left side. So there's no reason to upgrade to the Pro. You'll be able to use the same accessories, the same hubs, you'll need the same adapters and a card reader, and you'll still only be able to charge and connect accessories on the left side. If you're looking for additional ports, then you need to go to the 14-inch MacBook Pro, which gives you three Thunderbolt 4 ports, one on the right and two on the left. You also get an SD card reader and an HDMI port on the right, so it's less likely that you're going to need a dongle or a hub. Then on the left, we're getting a Magsafe 3 port that we can use to quickly charge the 14-inch MacBook Pro without having to use one of the other ports. And at the same time, you have some protection against an accidental pull of the cable. Basically, it comes down to this. If you don't need more than 2 ports, you can go with the MacBook Air. And if you need more, then you should just skip the 13-inch MacBook Pro and go to the 14. When we look at the keyboard and the trackpad, there are some small differences and then one major one. So as far as the keyboard itself, all three of these have the exact same keyboard, which is my favorite keyboard on any laptop that I've used so far. The one on the 14-inch has a black anodized well, which I think looks nicer, but certainly wouldn't be reason enough to pay twice as much. The 14-inch MacBook Pro also has a slightly larger Touch ID button with a tactile ring, which I do like better, but again, it's not reason enough to upgrade. Now, the one major difference is the top of the keyboard. So the MacBook Air has a row of small function keys. The 13-inch MacBook Pro has a touch bar, then the 14-inch MacBook Pro has a full height row of function keys. Personally, I like the touch bar, but I do my best to read all of your comments, and I know that a lot of people don't, which is probably why Apple got rid of it. And at the end, I'm gonna call this section a tie because I can see this being about personal preference. If you love the touch bar, go with the 13-inch MacBook Pro. If you don't, grab one of the other two. Now moving on to the trackpads, these are my favorite trackpads on any laptop. The two MacBook Pro models have the same size trackpad, which is slightly larger than the one on the MacBook Air. I personally like the larger one, but again, in and of itself, that wouldn't be a reason for me to upgrade from the Air. When we look at the camera and the speakers, again, I think the choice comes down to the Air or the 14-inch MacBook Pro. So starting with the camera, the MacBook Air and the 13-inch MacBook Pro have the same 720p camera. It's fine, but you don't get an advantage by upgrading to the Pro. When we look at the 14-inch MacBook Pro, we're getting the newer 1080p camera with a larger sensor and better low light performance. And here's a quick sample to show you the difference. Here's a camera and microphone sample from the 13-inch MacBook Pro and the 14-inch MacBook Pro. This should give you a pretty good idea of what you should expect from these laptops if you plan on using them for video calls. So if you're looking for a better camera than the MacBook Air has, skip the 13-inch MacBook Pro and go right to the 14-inch. When we move on to the speakers, I have a pretty tough time telling the difference between the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro speakers. Both sound very good for laptop speakers, but they're close enough to where if you gave me like a blind test, I don't know that I'd be able to tell which is which. But then you move to the 14-inch MacBook Pro with a new 6-speaker system, and it's noticeably better, it's louder, and the sound is rich and less hollow. If you don't really use your speakers, then there's no reason not to get the Air. And if you want the best audio quality of the three, that's easily the 14-inch model. Now, when it comes to battery life, I think a lot of people focus on one number and they may miss the full story. So as far as capacity, you would expect the MacBook Air to be at the bottom. It's got a 49.9 watt-hour battery. The 13-inch MacBook Pro is 58.2, and then the 14-inch MacBook Pro is at the top with a 70 watt-hour battery. Now, the number that most people go to when they talk about battery life is the one that Apple advertises, which is 20 hours for the 13-inch MacBook Pro, 18 hours for the MacBook Air, and 17 hours for the 14-inch MacBook Pro. But that's the number for Apple TV movie playback hours. So if that's the only reason why you're getting this laptop, then the difference between 20, 18, and 17 is not going to be a major one. And what I want to do is take a look at what happens when we switch to something like wireless web surfing. So the 13-inch MacBook Pro drops by 3 hours from 20 to 17. The MacBook Air also drops by 3 from 18 to 15, but the 14-inch MacBook Pro drops by 6 from 17 to 11. And to me, that is a significant difference. Now, I've used all three of these for everything from watching content to surfing the web, using different productivity apps, and then for photo and video editing. And without question, the 13-inch MacBook Pro has the best battery life. And I noticed that I have to charge it less than the other two. So if your priority is battery life, that would be one of the reasons why I would still get the 13-inch MacBook Pro. When we look at performance, there are a few things that we need to consider. So the 14-inch MacBook Pro that I'm using here is the base M1 Pro chip with an 8-core CPU, and the M1 chips on both of these 13-inch MacBook Pros also have an 8-core CPU. Now, one important difference to remember is that the M1 chip has 4 high-performance cores and 4 high-efficiency cores. The M1 Pro chip has 6 high-performance cores and 2 high-efficiency cores. So we expect it to perform better. When we look at single-core performance, all 3 of these have similar scores. Then when we move to multi-core performance, as you would expect, the two 13-inch models are about the same, and the 14-inch MacBook Pro is ahead by about 29%. If you watched my videos about the M1 MacBook Pro, you probably remember that one of the advantages that I gave it over the MacBook Air is the active cooling system. So as you push the M1 chip harder and harder, the system heats up, and the MacBook Air will start throttling back performance in order to cool down. But the 13-inch MacBook Pro is able to turn the fan on, stay cooler, and then maintain performance. The thing is, if you're someone who needs sustained performance, then my guess is that you would also benefit from a more powerful chip. If you're editing video, if you're batching photos or compiling, and you're doing this to the point where the CPU is being pushed to 100% for a long period of time, you're probably the type of user who would save a lot of time in the long run by using a more powerful laptop. Since time is money, especially if you're using this laptop for work, and the 14-inch MacBook Pro isn't that much more expensive than the 13-inch, I think it's a better value. But this is where I think most people make a mistake. I'm going to use the prices from the Apple Store because they're consistent, but you can usually find better prices by using the links in the description. So if I just go to the Apple website and I see that the 13-inch MacBook Pro is $1299 and the 14-inch MacBook Pro is $1999. And you may think twice about spending this additional $700. But once you realize that the 14-inch MacBook Pro comes with 16 gigabytes of unified memory and 512 gigs of internal storage, you see that in order to get the 13-inch MacBook Pro to that same configuration, you have to add another $400. So now we're only at a $300 difference for a machine that's going to give you a larger and better display, more ports in terms of quantity and the types of ports, Magsafe, a better camera, better speakers, and a significantly more powerful chip. So here's how I look at this decision. For the majority of buyers, the MacBook Air is a perfect laptop. It's plenty powerful, it's super efficient, it's light, it's portable, and you can get it for under $1,000. If you need more, then the choice comes down to $1699 for the 13-inch MacBook Pro with 16 gigs of unified memory and 512 gigs of internal storage, or $1999 for the 14-inch MacBook Pro with the M1 Pro chip and the same amount of memory and internal storage. So personally, I think that you're getting a lot more for this extra $300, and I would go with either the MacBook Air or the 14-inch MacBook Pro. And now that you watched this video, you should see how the 14-inch MacBook Pro compares with the 16. Click on my face to subscribe. Hopefully this video was helpful. You know what I always say, buy it nice or buy it twice. Good luck and see you soon.